Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien here, sitting in for Paul Harvey on Wednesday, February 22nd, 2022. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, today's story is on U.S. Grant, originally called Useless Grant, then U.S. Grant, and Ulysses Simpson Grant. And he was the 18th President of the United States and the General of the U.S. Army who won the Civil War. Everybody's got some point of views of Grant, most of them not good. They said he was a lousy general, he was a butcher, he was a lousy president with all the scandals. Well, don't you say that about Richard Nixon 100 years after his time? Same thing. Republican too. And yet Richard Nixon had a fairly covered funeral, didn't he, when he died in 1994? Yeah. Well, unlike Nixon, Ulysses Grant had a lot of failures. So he was pretty well known for failures. Heck, he even had to get wood to support his family, so he would chop wood and take it down in Missouri, the town he lived in. And he married a lady whose family was opposed to his. His father was very much an abolitionist. His father-in-law, on the other hand, was very much a slave owner, and Ulysses went to live with them for a while in Missouri. Oh yeah, Missouri! And although this is just before the Civil War, and this is a story you don't know, okay? Ulysses Grant was, like I said, down in a rock in a hard place. And he, had a slave that he worked with, that he was given to his wife by her father, Mr. Bent. Yeah, the Bent family in Missouri, and you guys that are from Missouri know about the Bent family. They were well known back then in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. Mr. Bent was quite a character. Oh boy. As slavish as they came, and as, how would you say today, anti-black is the way to put it. Okay, that was Mr. Bent. His wife, on the other hand, loved her husband. I mean, she and Ulysses S. Grant, for all the good and the bad they went through, and they went through a lot, they loved each other. Now, Ulysses was always growled upon by Mr. Bent and the other people in Missouri, or Missouri, as you guys call it, for, working alongside the slave that they gave him. I forget what his name was, Bobby, I think. Anyway, towards the end of 1859, Ulysses took his slave, Bobby, and went into town. And he had gathered some money, because you had to pay in those days to free a slave. Did you know that? Really? Yeah, you had to pay to free a slave. Oh, that was kind of crazy, wasn't it? Well, the government has to earn money anyway. Oh, Yes. Well, so he freed Bobby. I think that's what his name was. And the guy that was handling the transaction there in the town, the town, what was it, merchant or something? I forget what the name it was in those days. He asked him a question. You know that you could get more money for this one slave that'll keep you going for a long time, and why do you want to free him? And Ulysses looked at Bobby, looked at the guy, and he says, well, I can't own a human being. And he looks human to me. Different pigmentation, but he still looks human to me. Take a lesson, African Americans. There's only one other guy that's done this. George Washington did it with William Lee when he died in December 14th, 1799. He had 577 slaves at Mount Vernon, okay? And in his will, he stipulated that William Lee would be freed with a pension of $32 a month. For $17.99, that was a heck of a lot for an American, African American, as pension, because he had suffered some injuries that he was his valet and went to everywhere where Georgie went. But George Washington, like Ulysses S. Grant later, had looked at the slaves from both sides, from the abolitionists and from the hardline slave owners, as Mr. Dent was. But the only one they ever freed, well, Mr. George Washington in the will had that after the death of his wife, Martha Custis, all slaves would be freed, okay? Martha, on the other hand, freed them before her death. Good for her. And they stayed at Mount Vernon, by the way. Can you imagine African Americans staying after you're freed to work for the person that enslaved you since they got married in 1759? Well, the story with Ulysses S. Grant is he freed Bobby and he told him, go be free. Go to a place that you are free. Get out of Missouri. Okay? Whatever happened to Bobby, nobody knows. But a couple months later, Ulysses S. Grant went back to his father's leather store in Galena, Illinois. And he told his father he would work on him no matter what on the family business. And a couple months later, well, Abraham Lincoln got elected, and his friend came to see him, Philip Sheridan, pardon me. Him and Grant were back in West Point. They went to West Point together along with William Tecumseh Sherman, and other guys like Johnston and Stonewall Jackson on the other side, okay? So Grant knew these guys, and he also knew Robert E. Lee. Although Robert E. Lee would say later on, I don't remember or I don't recall, sir, when Ulysses S. Grant told him that they had met before. But Philip Sheridan came to say to Ulysses S. Grant, I need you for the Illinois Regiment. And Grant had long ago gave up his commission. He went in as a captain, he gave it up. because he had disillusioned with the Army and he was, as they called him, a loser. Useless Grant! Well, he did drink a lot too. But this was a different Grant. He took it. And when he took it, he took as George Washington did, because George Washington was disillusioned too at one time. This is another story. But like George Washington, he took it with a second thing, like, this is an oath that I'm taking, not for me, not for the U.S. Army, but for the American people. And from that day in late 1860 to the time he conquered Robert E. Lee on Appomattox on April 9th, 1865. And beyond that, till the time he left the Army in 1867, Ulysses S. Grant kept his promise. And he went to as high as Lieutenant General and General of the Armies, which only two people had had before. George Washington had had before him. Okay? And the rest of the story today is, as you know, Ulysses S. Grant went through a bad time after he left the presidency, and he was so poor it wasn't even funny. Just like he was in the 1850s. He wrote a book that gave him some money, and they established where he's buried today. And who knows who's buried there? Well, Grant's buried in Grant's tomb. All right. In 1885? Yeah. Wham. Do we know that? No. But we think so. Well, to give you a hint of what's going on, April 27, 2022 will be the 200th birthday of Ulysses S. Grant. And two senators, one of them, Senator Blunt from Missouri, is telling Secretary of Defense Austin to give Ulysses S. Grant one final promotion to General of the Armies. And he wanted to do it by April 22nd, 2022. It won't get done by then, but it's still alive. And this is an alien's plea to you American people to please write to your congressmen and senators and get that promotion for Ulysses S. Grant to General of the Armies. You gave it to a guy that really didn't deserve it. John J. Pershing. He was the first General of the Armies. And you didn't like that for decades. So what did you do? In 1976, General or President Gerald R. Ford started a petition behind the scenes that eventually succeeded in promoting one George Washington in 1976 posthumously to General of the Armies, 201 years after he took the office of Commander-in-Chief. Therefore, as an alien from another planet, I say another person that deserves that is Ulysses S. Grant, sitting in for Paul Harvey. And now you know the rest of the story.